The Immersion Foundation presents deep conversation with ambassadors on the cutting edge of combative arts as part of a greater mission to revive the study of hoploology through research, expeditions, and archival projects around the world. The Immersion Foundation combines rigorous academic research with hands-on immersion in the combative arts and elite performance training, forging a new path of growth, adventure, and contribution.
Just so we don't lose focus, I'll let Perry kick this off. And Perry, maybe just for the record, right, since we're recording and keeping everything as a part of the archives as well, if you just want to lay the context and then kick off, and then I'll jump in after that, and then see for Chris post-call if you have 5 minutes for me. Just want to pick up where we had left off last. Yeah?
Sure. Yeah.
Well,
All right.
Sifu Chris, as we discussed, this is we're working on a 25th anniversary issue of the Guru Dan Inosanto biography that I wrote. You were one of the key individuals that I wasn't able to interview so many years ago. So thank you for giving us of your time today.
Sure.
I spoke briefly to you about some of the subjects that we were going to delve into, but please feel free to elucidate on anything that I may ask if there's further context that you believe is necessary. And I guess I'll start it off by just asking you to give us a little bit about your background. I understand you were one of the original backyard students. So if you could just tell me about your training a little bit for context.
You mean about how I became involved with JKD?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I had done other martial arts, and I always like to say it's interesting because Bruce Lee was the individual who sparked my interest and my passion for martial arts when I was 11, and then 6 years later, I find myself beginning to train in the art that he developed. So, like I said, I'd done other martial arts previously, but I read two magazine articles. The first one was Bruce's "Liberate Yourself from Classical Karate," and the second one was Dan's article, "JKD is Fast, Powerful, and Deceptive." And both of them, again, they struck a resonant chord with me. So I lived in California, in Santa Monica. Black Belt Magazine was in Culver City. So I contacted them and I asked about training in JKD and the potential of it. And they informed me that Bruce was in Hong Kong making movies. The only person teaching was Dan Inosanto, who taught out of the gym in his backyard in Carson, California, where he lived. And I said, well, can I have his phone number? And they said, no, but it's in the phone book. So I looked it up, and sure enough, it was in the phone book. Called Dan. Didn't get to talk to him for probably the first 3 or 4 phone calls because being a teacher at Malaga Cove Junior High School and then teaching the JKD. So I would talk to his wife, Sue Inosanto, at the time. And eventually I got to talk to Dan. And he informed me, well, I only teach 10 people or 12 people at a time. I might be starting another class in whenever down the road. And but he would just keep saying, well, I tell you what, call me back in a week. Excuse me. So 1 week to the day, I would call him back. I would note it on my calendar, and then I would call him. And again, it would be like the same line over and over and over again. I might be doing this. So call me back in a week. And the only thing I can say is that I guess I must have worn him down because in the middle of our conversation, he just said, okay, I tell you what, why don't you come down tomorrow when class is going on and see me? So I drove down. It was about 25 miles from my house. And the JKD class was the only class that was being taught at that time. He had a 900 square foot gym in his backyard. So we sat on a little bench while the class was going on and basically ran it. And, again, this class was composed of people like Daniel Lee, Richard Bastillo, Jerry Poteet, Bob Bremer, Tim Tackett was there at the time, Teddy Lakai. So we talked for about an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours while the class was going on. And then at the end of it, he said, okay, well, do you want to start training? And I I said, yeah, of course, So he's like, okay. So I can remember, even to this day, I can get the same feelings right now as when I left Dan's backyard and was driving home in my car. And I was like, oh my God, yeah. So I was like 17 and a half at the time.
Oh, great.
So I began training in Dan's backyard at the time. And that was June 3rd, 1973. And 6 weeks later is when Bruce passed away. And, Dan was devastated. Everybody was devastated. Dan especially devastated. Excuse me. And he wasn't even going to, he went to the funeral, and he wasn't even going to, sure he was going to continue teaching for a few weeks. And then I think it was a combination of several things. One was people like Richard Bastillo and Daniel Lee talking about training. But then he also got a note from Steve McQueen, which basically said, because he used to have it at the school for a while, trained, and basically it said, like, Dan, Bruce did his thing, and I'm sure he will want you to do yours. You're a good man. Just kind of like go on. And so he did. And that was the beginning of my training in the backyard.
Now, would this, I'm assuming this would have been a JKD concepts type of class, or was there a differentiation between original JKD and concepts at that time?
There was JKD. That was it. Yeah, and again, you either get it or you don't. Those terms I don't use with regard to myself. If other people want to use them, that's perfectly fine. G-Kondo is G-Kondo, and to me, and you either, like I said, you get it or you don't. At the time, too, Dan and Richard, let me just preface this, because I always run into this with regards to when I'm talking about Dan or Richard. There's such a hierarchy that seems to have evolved over the years with, Sijo this, Sigung that, Sifu this. Dan, I respect Dan immensely. He was my Sifu, he was my teacher. But I refer to him as Dan at times, and at times I refer to him as Sifu. Like when I was in the class, yes. When I was with him at his house, it was Dan. That was the acceptable thing. That was what you did. And with Richard, it's the same way, and all of these guys. So, I preface this because I get contacted all of the time, and it's, it's C. Joe Bruce, it's C. Gung Bruce, it's Seafood Dan. And I'm like, good, you want to call it, you want to do that, that's fine. That's not the era that I came up with, and it's not the mentality. So
G-Kondo feels like they completely missed the point.
Yes, yeah, very much so. But at the time, they had just, or a couple of years prior, they were just beginning to investigate the Filipino martial arts. So at the class in Dan's backyard, the class, we do like an hour and a half or so of JKD, and in the final, or after that, those who wanted to stayed around while we did Filipino martial arts. That they, like I said, that they were investigating. This was with Manong Leo Heron, Angel Cabalas, Ben Lagusa, all of these individuals. And so we had a class. At the time, the JKD, I mean, the Filipino martial arts was, to use the term, JKDized, if you will, because there was a very informal approach to it. I mean, it was very professional, like the JKD, but there was an informality to it, very, very informal.
Mm-hmm. So this wasn't a time where they had the two camps.
They didn't exist.
Evolved later. Okay.
They didn't exist. Yeah. The two camps, they're flip sides of the same coin to me. Each possessing some of the other, like the yin yang. Those didn't exist, and those terms were actually created and used by people outside the periphery of the central part of G-Kondo. Like I said, I know where the name G-Kondo concepts came from, and I know where the name original G-Kondo, and they're both from groups that were not in the central hub, if you will, of Jeet Kune Do. And again, I have to say this. Look, I knew when I began studying in Jeet Kune Do, I was not studying a style. I knew that Jeet Kune Do was principles and concepts and ideas and training methods and training philosophies that Bruce was developing and going through. It's just that's the name that he referred to it as, and before he referred to it as Junfan Gung Fu. So that's why I said that the two camps is something that came up much later and a result of the fragmentation, if you will, of the Jeet Kune Do family.
Okay, great. Well, that's good to
Can
know.
I ask?
Go ahead, Mahipal.
See for Chris.
Yes.
Trying to see how best to ask this question. The Lukai family, right? I mean, they played. I think you know where I'm going in this.
No, I don't. But I know Teddy Lukai, Lucky Lukai. I was incredibly, I was good friends with them. They were good friends with me. Their family, Arlene, let's go. You on?
So my question is, this whole thing, the whole, I believe it was called the Kali JKD Academy that started with a deep focus on FMA at a particular time. Mm-hmm. How was that connected with the original group, if at all? And was it a bifurcation that happened from the original group? Or was this a next generation where a lot of the Stockton influence was primary and the JKD, I hate that term, but the JKD piece was an addition, another module, if you will.
Well, okay. Again, let's go back and look at this. When the school opened, right, in whenever it was like April of 1974, part of that was that Richard and Dan wanted to continue their research into the Filipino martial arts. There's this whole thing about Dan making a promise to Bruce that he would never, commercialize the art. To me, that it's kind of a misperception because, again, from somebody who was there at the time, Bruce had told Dan, and this is from me being there and Dan explaining this to me. Bruce had said to Dan, "Hey Dan, look, I know that you could probably make a lot of money off of Jeet Kune Do, but I'd be very disappointed if you did." And Dan said that he wouldn't. So that's a comment, that's a statement of honesty that's been blown into this mandate that, I made this huge promise. That was Dan being Dan. He's a very honest individual. And he massively respected Bruce's wishes. So they wanted to continue investigating the Filipino arts. They wanted a place to continue to train Jeet Kune Do because Dan, he actually started a teen class, kind of like in his backyard, but it just outgrew. So they were looking for a place, and hence they opened the Filipino Kali Academy. And it was not called the Jeet Kune Do Academy. There were no, the words Jeet Kune Do didn't exist on the outside of it until later on. They put like a small sign, but the sign up at the top was the Filipino Kali Academy. And what it was like Dan always referred to his schools as they're my sandbox, my toy box that I can go in and do the stuff. So that was the primary thing. And then they had the Jeet Kune Do, the senior class, which was the Jeet Kune Do class. And then they started to do these other classes, again, because you have to pay rent. And so Dan approached it from the idea of, okay, I'm going to set this up like when you go to college, how you have freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. And we'll have classes, and we'll call them phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and phase 4. And then the individuals that progress through that phase would then be voted into the Jeet Kune Do class by the senior members of the class. And in the beginning, that was very easy because it was small, but then obviously it blossomed out and it became the mecca for Jeet Kune Do. And, so you didn't know a lot of the people. So that was the idea. And then in order to keep that differentiation, Dan said, we're going to refer to these other classes like Junfan martial arts classes, right? And then there's the Jeet Kune Do class. The problem with that was that the people in the Junfan martial arts were basically doing the same thing the people in the Jeet Kune Do class were doing, but at a much lower level, like beginners. So it kind of how does the public see this? Well, now there's Jeet Kune Do, and then there's Junfan martial arts, and again, it stems back to Dan's statement that he made to Bruce about commercializing the art. So, like I said, you had all of these phases, and that's exactly what they were: phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, Jeet Kune Do class, and then at the same time, like in the Jeet Kune Do class, we did Filipino martial arts at the end of it. Some of the guys didn't stay for it. Some of the senior JKD class people didn't stay for it because it was later. But part of that also was some of these guys, like Tim Tackett and Bob Bremer, they lived like 85 miles away. So for them to stay late, and they had jobs and things like that. So like I said, in the beginning, there was a very, very strong gravitational field. Bruce Lee was an immense gravitational force for all of these individuals. And when the school first opened, that gravitational force was still there and remained. But after a while, it started to wane and wobble a little like that. But that's where the Filipino things came in. Now again, to go back to what you were saying, is we had those, and I mean, I consider myself so blessed because I got to meet and work out a little bit, not like Dan, but Angel Caballas, right? Met him numerous times, worked out with him when he used to come down to Dan's, went up to Stockton, I think, once. And in fact, that's the very first certificate that I ever got, was a basic instructor certificate in Caballas Serrata. And this was the time when his two main people were Jimmy Tacosa and Mike and I. They would travel with him. They would come down all the time. Those were his two number one guys. Mm-hmm. And then La Costa, who was amazing, who I met several times, and then Lagusa and Leo Hiron. So having the opportunity to meet and work with these guys along with Dan was amazing. And Lucky was very close with the Velabrea group because he was Floro's godson, So Lucky came in and with his boxing background, and we started a boxing team, and Lucky and Richard Bastillo were like some of the coaches of the boxing team. So it just kind of, grew out of all of that. So,
Great. I'd like to change up a little bit in that idea of having a loosely based non-commercial organization that you referred to. Some years later, then we have the founding of the Nucleus. Could you talk a little about your experiences with the Nucleus and what transpired with regard to that?
Sure. Well, again, I have to preface this because the Nucleus began in whenever it was 96, 97. In the early 1980s, another group was started called the JKD Society. And again, I was on the board or the group of that. And that was like Dan, Richard Bastillo, Jerry Poteet, Bob Bremer, myself. So it was more of those guys from the Chinatown School. But the JKD Society was created because there was, again, you look at the history and you look at Dan's books, there were schools opening up in Europe and all over, the Mideast, and, Club Jeet Kune Do, this, and people were writing stuff. So the idea was to become a clearinghouse of information where somebody could say, are these people correct or not? And it was like, yes, no, true, no, not true. It suffered the same fate. It started, and then for whatever reason, it just, it just dropped. So that was back in the mid 80s. In the 90s, in 96, Cass Magda and I are very good friends, and we were talking about the same thing. And so we came up with this idea about, wouldn't it be really cool to create like a fellowship, where that's not an instructorship. It's like you become a fellow of photography, you become a fellow of Jeet Kune Do. So we put all this material together, and like I said, you know what the time was like. There was all of these different things popping around, different groups, and and I have to say that so many of these people, they all came out of the woodwork years later, and was like, oh well, I'm this and I'm that, and it's like, okay, but so what, So we put this idea together, and I broached the subject with Linda, and she said, well, let's take a look at it, because we were seeing all of these things appearing about Jeet Kune Do, and and she goes, well, this doesn't even resemble what Bruce was doing. And so we decided to have a meeting, and we had the inaugural meeting, which took place in Seattle, of which Dan was a part of, because the idea was to have all of these different groups represented. And I don't mean that, oh, he was just a representative. There was this initial group. We met in Seattle. Dan was a part of that initial meeting. Linda, Shannon, Daniel Lee. That's where I'd already met John Little before and known him, but that's where he was first introduced to a lot of members. And the idea was, we met, we discussed these issues, and it took a while. It wasn't just one meeting, but it was, can we create an educational body that can it wasn't about addressing all of who's got this, who's certified. None of that was in it. It was about, can we create an educational body that can share with people the clearest, most accurate picture of what Bruce Lee was doing in his evolution and what he was teaching. It was not about any of this other stuff, It was simply to become an educational society, an educational foundation, a well of information, if you will. That is how it started at the initial meeting. Again, like I said, Dan was at the initial meeting. He didn't come to the second one. I'm not sure I want to, we can discuss that later. But anyway, he chose not to be a part of it. A short while after that, Larry Herzl chose not to be a part of it, again, for very specific reasons. And then, quite honestly, a massive misinformation campaign was launched about it.
Well, since you're one of the particulars who would know about these things, perhaps you could elucidate as to, all these this misinformation and what was in true fact or not.
Sure. I mean, it's like I said, what do you want to know? It was massive. There was the biggest thing was, they're trying to take JKD away from Dan. They want to take control of it. It had nothing to do with that. As I said, the initial idea was to create something where you create standards, again, like a university, right? You create standards, or like becoming a fellow of photography, that if somebody reached a high level of scholarship, both physically and mentally knowledgeable with regards to Jeet Kune Do, they could apply to the foundation and be recognized as a fellow of Jeet Kune Do. That was the whole idea behind it. So it wasn't like you could put this on your wall and, oh, look, I'm a certificate, I'm an instructor under the foundation. What it would be almost like the good housekeeping, how they used to have it. All it was to do was to say that if you were interested in learning Jeet Kune Do, if you went to this person, you would know that this person had a high degree of scholarship in Jikendo. The philosophical element, the physical element, the scientific element.
A clearinghouse almost.
Yeah. Again, a well of information, because, I mean, people can say what they want. Being friends with Linda, being friends with John, and the amount of material that most of those people have never even seen, right, or had never seen at the time. And then with John acting as the archivist, is like we said, it was to bring out the information for people, And then, as I said, it was Dan felt that he sent a letter, okay, to the foundation, and Linda actually asked me the day before about, what do you think Dan will do? And I said, he's going to do one of two things. He's either going to come in, he's going to say, hey, this is a great idea. Let's go for it. Let's go. Or he's going to say no. Or I said, actually, he won't even turn up. He'll send a letter. And what this letter will say in this letter, that, I feel I cannot be a part of this. I have to do my own thing. I wish you well. Very next day, during the meeting, Larry Herzog comes in late. I'm late because Dan asked me to read this letter. Read the letter. It was like everything that I had said to Linda. And she looked at me and I said, it's because I know Dan. Okay? So Dan felt that that's what he wanted to do. But again, there was no mandate of any leader at the time. So again, like I said, it was the underlings. It was the underlings that started all of this. And it got very, very, what's the word, vitriolic? I mean, the letters that were sent to Linda, the things that were sent to all of us, but, this is Bruce Lee's wife. And the letters, which I still have some of them in my records, stating Bruce Lee's dead, his son is dead, and now you're killing his art. How would you write that to somebody? And especially if you are an instructor under somebody, and then the excuses were given, well, they were just emotional about it. And I'm like, that's no excuse. If one of my instructor staff had written that, they would be called out on the floor, to explain themselves, to apologize in person. So it was, like I said, it was that. It became this massive struggle, And then I'm sorry. It's like I said, I love Dan and he was my teacher. But these individuals, these people, they did a lot of negative damage.
Well, that was one of the things I wanted to get into later.
Mm-hmm.
But I just wanted to get your comment. My research years ago was that Dan was looking for a meritorious status on this board. And when that was not granted, that was one of the reasons why he didn't go forward. Do you have any comment in regard to this area?
Yeah, that's a very simplistic answer to what happened, because it all took place during the formation while we were still looking at what was going on. Dan stepped forward, and Belinda has even spoken to this publicly in a magazine or to go about it. And the fact was that Dan said, "No, I can't do it. I want, can I have emeritus status?" Well, the word emeritus is, where you're given this position after a long time of being a part of something. Well, the thing hadn't even started yet. So you couldn't, how can you have an emeritus status of an organization that's 3 weeks old? I mean, to put it bluntly, right? It doesn't exist. So, and then Taki, the advisor or whatever it was Taki, and I'm trying to remember who else. And again, we're going back 30 years now. Yeah. So the idea was, okay, why don't you why don't you just become a consultant? And that's what I said. It was almost, and I don't know, who did it, but it was almost like, well, that's an insult to this individual. So no. So it was the whole point was, again, I'm asking you, can you give emeritus status to somebody for a university if the university is 3 weeks old?
Yeah.
It doesn't exist, right? That's it. The thing is that Linda has always took the high road with regards to any of the stuff, even after everything that was done, and that Dan was an integral part of it. Hockey, yes, Dan is an integral part of this. However, the choice to not be a part of it was solely based on one individual,
Mm-hmm.
and that was Dan. And then, like I said, based from that, oh my God, this thing opened. And I have to say too that in the entire time that it happened, there were only two individuals from if you want to call it the Inosanto camp that actually approached me and discussed it with me like grown adults. And those individuals were Rick Young and Damon Caro. And they actually came and we talked about things. They were the only people out of this entire time who, like I said, approached this thing like adults.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for elucidating on that. That was one of the issues we wanted to get to. You and I have talked briefly about, and I'll have to choose my words wisely here, almost to say like the cult of Inosanto, where those around him may make dealing with Dan difficult, or advancing through, or organizations merging in that sort of way.
Mm-hmm.
You had said that you felt free to talk about some of those difficulties. Could you perhaps give us your background as to what structures might be in place, or what individuals, without naming names if you don't want to, may have caused this cult-like behavior?
I can't name names because I honestly don't know. All I saw was, like, as I said, and I have to relate it back to Jeet Kune Do. What went from a Jeet Kune Do was always known for its irreverence, right? I mean, that was a whole part of the thing when the art first came out. It respected tradition, but it didn't follow it, and it didn't just arbitrarily accept it. Everything you did, even the Filipino arts, was brought down, taken out on the floor, broken apart, looked down by, that's what we call the Jeet Kune Do mindset. And so you had that. And then, as I said, over time, which is why, like, on my website, and you can find them anywhere, but I have a bunch of PDF articles that people are welcome to go in and look at, that go back to, some of them go back to the 70s. So you can see that Bruce was often referred to as Bruce in all of these articles, even and especially by Dan. Sometimes in the article it's Sifu, sometimes it's Bruce, but it's Bruce. And then, like I said, all of a sudden, and when we were in the backyard, okay, we had this board, and it had all of our names with, like, one of those little type things you make names on these little wooden pegs on the board. And at the top of it, it had Bruce Lee, Si Joe, Si Gong, right? Grandfather and founder. And then Dan and etc. And then our names were underneath. Okay. Everybody knew that. Everybody knew that Bruce Lee was the founder of Jeet Kune Do, but it wasn't put out there, and like I said, so all of a sudden now, over the years and being a part of it and seeing it, is like, now everything's gone. All of a sudden, it's see, every time the word is used, oh, see Joe Bruce, see Gong Bruce, this. I'm sorry, I call it a false hierarchy, occurred. And so, again, there's a trickle down. It's like, oh, there's Bruce way up there, and he's a C Joe, and here's Dan, and I grew up at a time with Dan when one of the first things he told me is, it's okay for you to disagree with me, and it's okay for us to argue about certain things. That's not going to change anything. And all of a sudden that seemed to be the shift where it's like, this individual's word is law, and if you say anything negative or against it, well, now you've stepped on the toes of the master. So over time, this hierarchy and this approach, and then there were a lot of outside influences too. There were a lot of outside influences from people, Dan had worked with, who were very traditionally oriented. No, they should be calling you this. They should be saying that. And so over time, again, I just got there. As I said, it became horrendous in my eyes. I mean, like you said, it became it became very, very cult-like. And if it was just me talking about it, I would say one thing. But when I've had students who have gone to a seminar, and these are highly intelligent students who are doctors, and they said we couldn't go back to second day because it was just too much. It was too much like a cult. Everybody was hanging on, this man's words, and every time he would say something, and I don't know because I haven't been there in years. Every time Dan would say something, everybody would go, oh, so, and bowing at the feet of the master, so to speak. And I'm from a different time, so like I said, I have nothing but respect for this man, but mine's very different than that.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that, because that was one of the things we wanted to put in this version to more normalize and not be as Mahipal says, more fan bookish to this. One of the sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I just want to add something here. Is like I said, let's diverge here and look at what takes place now, as because you've seen it now. Okay, like I said, my first years with Dan, backyard, College Academy, going over to Dan's house all of the time, right? This group of individuals having gatherings, parties at Dan's house. Everybody's there. Jerry, Richard, wives, girlfriends, constant, Dan's like, hey, I'm going to go to bed anymore. It's to sleep, just crash here. Very kind of Hawaiian, Polynesian, like the relatives. And that's what you did. This informality, okay? One of my most favorite memories from being with Dan and at that time was being at one of these gatherings, staying overnight. We got up in the morning, we had breakfast, and Dan goes, hey, Chris, come on, let's go. And I go where? He goes, come on, let's go. So we get in his van, and we drove to Palos Verdes, a point. And he took me to all of the places where he shot those photos with Bruce. He goes, and they're built up now and changed. He goes, oh, this is where we shot this, and this is where we shot that. And that was the normalcy. See, that was to me, I have seen Dan in every phase of emotion, happy, sad, angry. And I love him for all of those. But yes, he was a human being most of all. That, again, we're back to that. So, yeah.
Which brings me to one of my other questions that we were interested in is, where would you put Dan's place in the legacy of the evolution of JKD after Bruce Lee's death? Is there, any way that you would be able to put him in the flow of that, or does it continue, or is it how would you rank him or place him?
I wouldn't rank him, and I think that's trying to do that kind of stuff is really ends up being a waste of time. Again, nobody was expecting Bruce Lee to pass away, Dan least of all, and so that was, like I said, there was no mandate that, well, if anything, if I die, you take over. That was a very organic thing because Dan was still doing it. Everybody out there, I say point blank, everybody out there owes a debt of gratitude, if you will, not an unfounded one, to the fact that Dan and Inosanto proceeded to continue on that route. And like I said, in those years, the Jeet Kune Do was very, very prevalent on it. And Dan was a PE teacher. He was a coach. So, for example, like I said, when I first joined, we did a lot of sparring in the backyard when we first opened the school, and I got my hat handed to me. I got my clock cleaned by people like Richard Bustillo, Bob Brammer, Daniel Lee, over and over and over again, because I'm like 18, 19 years old, right? Daniel Lee's a welterweight boxing champion. So, like I said, this thing evolved gradually, and Dan was doing his thing. And then his investigation of the Filipino martial arts, went along with that. I think the thing that people have to first understand is that Dan's evolution of Jeet Kune Do was not the same as Bruce Lee's evolution of Jeet Kune Do. They diverged in terms of their goals and their structures. Bruce was not selfish, but the point is that Bruce Lee was interested in Bruce Lee. Yes, in the beginning he was doing this art and he was working, he was sharing with people, but it was all about what I can do, for me, and then I'll share it with things like with other people. So I see what happens is there's a confusion, and people go, well, Dan's personal evolution as a martial artist is the evolution of Jeet Kune Do, and they're not the same thing. They're very, very different. Mm-hmm. So, that's my point on that. Is that, do you understand that?
Yeah, great answer. Yeah. Great answer.
Yeah. Can I jump?
Sure.
100%. I see what he's saying, and my question was going to be the evolution of the pedagogy. So, and that's based on two factors. Right. From my perspective, and
sure.
You've done this a lot longer than I have, but so I also think that the character, to use the word loosely, the ethnicity of the art completely changed. And there are phases from my perspective as I look at it, as I look at the stuff, it changed. So I would love to hear from you what you've seen in the evolution of the pedagogy.
Well, like I said,
from the early days to now.
Sorry, yeah. First of all, Dan was a PE teacher, so he broke it down. When I began training with him, and when the Kali Academy first opened, he was much more coach-like in his teaching. Okay, perfect example I can give you is one time I was kicking a focus glove, and the guy was holding it high off the ground, and so I went up on the ball of my foot and I kicked this focus glove, and Dan was walking by at the time. I go, "Oh, Sifu, that's wrong, right?" Because I kind of went up on my foot to hit. He goes, "Did you hit the glove?" "Yeah." "Did you hit the glove hard?" "Yeah." "Good." Then he walked away. I tell my students that, and when I go and do seminars, that when I was involved in it at that time, the 4 most dreaded words that ever existed in Jeet Kune Do in the school was maybe, sometimes, and it depends. Because you'd be doing stuff and, whatever, and then you say, "Hey, Sifu, if the guy does this, then I should go like this." And he'd go, "Maybe," and walk away. Or, "If the guy does this, should I do this?" "It depends." That's the way he would talk, Okay, so how are you going to do it? So let's forget about all this right now and just do that. It's a very different teaching methodology, And as I said, all of the sparring, and then after a period of time, Dan comes in and he goes, "You know what?" He goes, "Now, being a PE teacher, when he was in school and college, the football teams would scrimmage every day. And then by the time the game came on, 3 or 4 other guys were out injured. So nobody does that training anymore. They train, they develop, they work skills. And so, like I said, he walked in and he goes, "I'm going to show you now that you don't have to train just sparring all of the time. So that's when we started working on timing drills and drills. But they were what I use the term, they were alive training drills. They weren't like, like more traditional. You just stand in a line and I do this and you do that. You're moving around with each other, but you're working on getting the timing of how to slip a punch. But you're also not going to get your clock clean if you make a mistake. Yes, it's going to hit. Yes, it's going to sting. So, like I said, he started bringing in training methodologies, right? That came from his sports background, and Bruce got a lot of information from Dan with regard to coaching in terms of even books. There's a book that I have some of the things from called The Psychology of Coaching. That was one of Dan's college books. And Bruce drew heavily from it, massively from it in terms of like endurance and timing and different things like that, because that's what Bruce did. He absorbed it. This is useful to me. And so Dan, like I said, Dan would do that, and then things would go on. And as I tried to explain, even with the Filipino arts, like I had to go back, and we went back later to with the Liberate Collie stuff, and he made us go back and learn the chicken step and the footwork, because we didn't do that in the beginning. We did numerato and we did freelance stuff. He goes, but I want you to at least understand it. So then we went back and we did that if he wanted to. So like I said, it's how he taught at that particular time, and everything was like, well, let's see how it works. And again, it's sort of shifted over the years, and there were a lot of outside influences that were much more traditional oriented, and and I'd like to say I hope I answered the question. Did I answer it? Okay, because I would like to say one thing really quick, and that is the fact that we all know this, and this is not about denigrating any other art or any other people, right? But the fact of the matter is, the reason that the Wing Chun Kung Fu system enjoys such worldwide notoriety in the world today is because of one individual. And that individual is Bruce Lee. If he had gone into Hung Ga or Charlie Fat, maybe that would be it. So like I'm saying, that I'm not denigrating the art. I'm not, because people, oh my God, it's like you're saying this. No, the reason that the Filipino art enjoys its worldwide notoriety today is because of one individual, and that individual is Dan Inosanto. And again, that's not saying that these arts weren't good or these guys aren't great teachers. It is that it was Dan's status in the martial art world that brought the Filipino arts to the worldwide stage, So, yeah.
I believe my colleague Maya had some questions that he wanted to jump in and take the lead on the interview here for.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah, I think the pedagogy was the big piece, and then I think secondly, what I'm seeing now is this is my personal experience that I'm saying. So what I'm seeing now is a lot of seminar-based distance education. It served its purpose. It served its purpose at a particular time, but it's become from my perspective, it's become the de facto method. And I think a lot has been, I'll just speak frankly, a lot has been stripped, has just been stripped out because of it, right? So from that perspective, it's not even the same dish. If I was to look at food, it's the way I see it, it's not even the same dish, right? So then the question becomes, what is, if somebody wants to pursue Jeet Kune Do, forget all the adjectives and the labels that you add before and after, right? What the hell is that? And how does one go about it?
Right. Okay, I have to think about it. I just wanted to go back to what you were saying about the the teaching, right? And like you said, the seminars. Yeah, the seminars were okay, but that has, like you said, has become the de facto teaching method. So now here's the thing, and there are teachers in every group that are good, that I consider amazing teachers. And there are teachers I consider pretty boring bad ones. But if you have been brought up only learning seminar teaching methodology, how do you teach your students?
That's the point.
Unless you have done a bunch of work yourself, you teach what you were taught, right? So if you've been raised on seminar methodology, you teach, even in a class setting, seminar teaching methodology. And they're very, very different things. See? So this is where I see issues with teaching. Like, again, we all have certain things. My students know I do not give my students lists, of techniques or anything like that. I said, you want to write them down, it's fine. I wrote them down if I felt like it, but I'm not giving you like a list of, 26 double stick, methods, because that's all you will ever do is you'll look at that. And that's what I said. There are some people who will go outside of it, but the majority will just go, oh, and I'll just take that. That's the recipe. Like you said, I'll use that. Not how to cook the meal. That's the recipe for it. And that's a different type of teaching methodology. And this is where I have to say is that like you said, that seminar teaching methodology took place over time. When Dan first started, it was different. Do you know what they refer to as the box pattern in Sombrata?
Yes.
Okay. Don't teach it.
Yes,
teach it.
I agree.
Never will. But why was it invented? Because it was invented, and it was invented by Dan. This is why. Because I would go and assist with him on seminars. So you're teaching the Filipino martial arts, and you're teaching Jeet-Kune-Do. And in a 2.5-hour block, you've got to teach these people a bunch of stuff about the Filipino martial arts. And you want to get them to understand what the idea of flowing is, like counter for counter. Well, how do you do that? So he created that box pattern, as it's called, so that what he could do was he could show people, deflections and counters that exist, and then give them the experience of being able to put it together in a state of flow. That became the de facto thing that everybody just goes box pattern, bang, 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 which is why I cannot stand it. That is not the way. That is not the way I learned Sombrata. It's not the way he used to teach, because he used to go, give me an angle 1, bang, and then he'd give you an angle 1 back, then he'd give you an angle 3 back, then he'd give you an angle 4 back. He'd give you every angle, give me angle 2, and then he'd give you every line back. And so you developed it. That became the de facto teaching.
The instinctive response is gone from what I see, and it's fundamentally become the prison.
Yeah. And, I did, just a real funny part about it is a lot of the guys, like, and they're good friends of mine, they're like Bert and Blaze Long, and these guys, they all got into the movie industry and doing stunt work, right? And there's a post-apocalyptic movie with Van Damme that takes place in the future, and all these guys are into the stunt guys. And so I'm watching this mass fight take place, and I can see Bert over here, and I can see Blaze over here, and they're all fighting guys, and I'm going, they're doing the box pattern with blade. They're doing the box pattern with sticks. They're doing the box pattern with axes, because they could just make it flow. I'm going, box pattern, box pattern, box pattern, So, and those are all good guys. Like I said, those are some of the best guys. So now to go back, you were saying about, can you just give me that question again? I kind of went off a little bit.
Yeah, so no, I get it. I feel you. My question was, so if somebody wanted to come and study Jeet-Kune-Do, right, without any of the adjectives that,
right,
the branding that goes on,
mm-hmm,
what the hell would that be, and where would they go?
Where would they go? That's the difficult question.
Yes.
It depends on how do you define Jeet-Kune-Do, first of all, right? I have my own definition of Jeet-Kune-Do. I say it's mine because I developed over my 5 decades of training, right? So when somebody comes to me now and they say, "Oh, what's Jeet Kune Do?" I say it is a non-restrictive training process to cultivate your body as a martial instrument that you can express with the highest degree of efficiency and effectiveness without any limitations. That's it.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Because it was based, my training, even my training, my teaching has always been built around those, the two questions, whether they were Bruce or whatever, was how in learning how to use my body can I come to understand myself? And we have two arms and two legs. How can we use them with maximum efficiency and effectiveness? So that's why I said it has to depend on what your perception of Jeet Kune Do is. For me, Jeet Kune Do is not about the perpetuation of a style. It is as defined. It is about the personal cultivation of an individual as a martial artist. Again, without style base. So it is based on science of movement and combat. So first of all, like I said, you've got to know what it is. Again, I see people attempts made to realign, and again, I'm not saying that these are bad arts. There's people now that are trying to realign Jeet Kune Do with Wing Chun, and and some are saying, well, if he learned the whole system, he never would have, created Jeet Kune Do. Okay, good. You want to think that? That's fine. If he felt it was that, why did he move away from it? So, we're going to try and align it with this. We're going to try and align it with that. And I have Dan going to me, Chris, you need to understand that Jeet Kune Do has the essence of trapping in it, but it's not Wing Chun. It has the essence of grappling in it, but you are not a jiu-jitsu person or a judo person. It has the element of boxing in it, but you are not a boxer. You are a Jeet Kune Do person. And then when you really understand and move past that to where Bruce was going in the end, you're a human being expressing yourself as a martial artist. So where do you go to get that? That is a $64,000 question, as they say, right?
Yes, and the reason for that question is, the way I see it, it's a way of thinking and being and operating in the world.
Yes.
Not
Yeah.
the way, a way, right?
Yeah.
And that has to unfold for each person specifically. So the role of a teacher is not to be in their way.
Yeah.
And that's the challenge I see. So especially with to bounce off the question from Perry, with this deification of Dan, I call it, his sainthood. It's almost impossible to question anything.
Right.
So,
yeah. You're a heretic. Yeah.
Yes.
You're a heretic. And that's what I'm trying to explain is I did not grow up that way with Dan. I grew up with Dan saying, like I said, it's perfectly okay for you to disagree with me on certain things, and there is a difference between loyalty and blind loyalty.
Yes.
And they're very, very different things, right? You understand that?
Yes.
Yes. That's like you said. It's a deification. This person can do no wrong. Again, that's wonderful if you want to feel that way. I knew this man in like I said, in every emotion that he had as a human being, and that's what I respect him most as a human being. With his frailties and with his flaws. That is what makes him who he is. If you look even, for example, because I always say this, if you look at Dan Inosanto, Ted Wong, and Taki Kimura, who all, assisted Bruce or with him, they were all very similar in nature. They were much more they were more introverted. They were willing to be in the background and calm. Two Bruce Lees would have killed each other. Bruce Lee couldn't have had an assistant that was like him. They would have killed each other. So again, it becomes like that, this yin yang. They both grew from each other, right? But they're all human beings. So, like you said, that it is a deification.
And
And
I think it does him disservice. It does him a great
very much
disservice,
so.
actually.
Absolutely, it does,
Yeah.
because it does take away. He has a genius, you know. I've seen Dan go, like even when we had already gone. I'd already left to open my own school at the time, but we went to these Savant seminars at the same time, right? Training with the Savant team from France and stuff like that. And next week I see Dan walk in and he's got 20 combinations put together already, because this is the way his mind thinks. So he looks at that and he goes, okay, so, but if we change this, and we could go here, we could go here, we could go here, we could do this. So Dan has I call it a very particular genius, if you will, on things like that. But that's him, and it's like, you're not him. So, so everybody is content to, like we said, ride on the coattails, if you will. It's if that's what you want to do, that's fine. You have to leave the nest. That was always the thing to me. What you were saying about teaching just now and about standing in their way. I just did one of my little 15-minute martial art coach things the other day. Was the fact that is, as a teacher, your job is to give the students the building blocks to build with, and hopefully inject them with a massive dose of inspiration, and then step back and allow them to explore and build and create and give advice and counsel if and when it's needed. That's your job. That's your job as a teacher. And you also have to protect that thing about you've got to protect your student from your own influences. Well, that's a double-edged thing, because we're all influenced by people. Dan influenced me. John Little, Bruce Lee definitely influenced me. There's a difference between that and their prejudices. You've got to protect the students from your own prejudices. I don't like that type of kicking, or I don't like that kick. I've always told the guys who worked with me and became instructors, that's not your job. When you're training those people, it is to expose them to these learning experiences, because you might not like that particular kick, but they might take that kick and turn it into a dynamic weapon. So you've got to protect your students from your own prejudices. Oh, I don't like grappling, so we're never going to do it. Things like that. That's your job. Again, that's the teaching methodology. I study teaching because I love teaching. So I study all of the time. How can I be a better, more effective communicator? How can I, like you said, looking at the personal cultivation, looking at these students. Okay, well, you have all of these variables. You have the physical, the genetic component. You have the psychological nature. This person is very more, not introverted, but they're not interested in engaging. They'll fight if they have to, and they'll counterfight, but they're not interested in crashing in all of the time. So if you take that person and try and, no, you're going to crash in, it's going to frustrate them and frustrate you, and it's not their nature. So that's part of what makes it difficult to, much more difficult to teach, and why my good friend John Little says that's why it's not a mass art. It's not that it couldn't be learned by the masses. It's that you can't teach the mass at the same time. So I'd like to go back to when you were saying about the Jeet Kune Do concepts and the Jeet Kune Do original Jeet Kune Do names. When I was first traveling with Dan in like the late 70s, and one of the places we would go to, the guy would put up, and he's a good friend of ours, but every time we would go out there, there'd be these posters all around town. Dan Inosanto, Bruce Lee's protege, Jeet Kune Do. And every time before the seminar started, Dan would stand before the group and he'd say, look, I can't really teach you Jeet Kune Do in the fact that it's not standardized, you know? It's very individualized. What I can do is I can share some of the principles and concepts that exist in Jeet Kune Do and allow you to experience them. And after a couple of years, those posters started changing to, Dan Inosanto Jeet Kune Do concepts. So this is why I said this is where some of these words came from. It was just like, oh, and then the original came as a response to people who didn't think that Dan was doing the other stuff. That's to me, that's why I said that's why I never engage in arguments over original. It's not even worth the mental calories. Like I said, you either get it or you don't. You either get it or you don't.
I really like the way that you talked about the building blocks, because it brings me back to the idea of that Dan had said, you teach music, you teach notes, you let the person begin to play their own song once they learn how to read music, write it, and play it, which is analogous to what you were saying, which I think everybody now seems to be wanting to recite the same hymns from the same hymn book and not pursue, much the way that MMA has developed, not pursue a whole jazz-like fusion of things.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's basically it. Yes, you might start by playing particular songs, like if you're learning the guitar or the piano, right? But then the goal is to move to where you can play, and like you said, you can improvise. I go back to the thing with lists, and I see people, do you know these 64 trapping combinations? And I go, I don't really care. My point is, can you do it? Can you relate it in a live situation? Well, I know, 150 double stick combinations. Well, that's just dandy. I'm happy for you. Do you understand how to use the double sticks in a combative capacity? That's very, very different. Yeah. So like I said, that's the thing I love about Jeet Kune Do. I think you said it right. Jeet Kune Do is a state of being. It is not a set, concretized box of knowledge. It's a state of being. It's a way of thinking about things, which doesn't mean that we're not going to do similar things. I mean, I love it when people write and they go, well, if you're doing a finger jab, if you're doing a shin kick and a finger jab, you're just imitating Bruce Lee. You're not expressing yourself. And I said, so if I do a jump shot in basketball, am I just imitating, Michael Jordan, or am I making a jump shot? When Sting is playing a bass riff, is he expressing himself as a musician, or is he just copying, one of these other bass players that came along? They're stupid arguments. I mean, quite honestly, they're dumb. Why do you even say that? That's what. So these are things you run into in the JKD world.
One of my favorite questions, and it's got me shut off from a whole bunch of groups actually. Is I ask them, I say, okay, talk to me about JKD without mentioning Bruce, Dan, or Ted.
Yeah. Some people cannot do it. You're absolutely right. Yeah. But see, what they don't get, or to me, what they don't get is, again, I go back to John Little used to live up here for a while in Boise, and we became really good friends when the Nucleus was going on. And we used to have these mammoth 3-4 hour conversations at his house and drink gallons of coffee and do all kind when all of Bruce's material was there, and we would go through it. Stuff is this individual had no horse in the race. He wasn't Dan's camp, Ted's camp, whoever else's camp, and he had a philosophical background, so he understood it. So we would talk about all of this stuff, and he cleared up a lot of stuff for me because it was kind of like, yeah, well, that's great. That's great for Bruce. So what? What does that mean to you? What is it for you? And so it became very much the kind of thing of, hey, why don't you shake the hand of the hand that shook Bruce Lee's hand? Well, that's great for them, but what does that have to do with you and your development, your personal development? Maybe something, maybe nothing. You know, we get back to that deification. Yeah, you know, it just I don't know. I you know, like I said, don't get it. So yeah, how do you
Yeah.
talk about it? Well, first of all, you've got to understand it, right? And if you haven't taken the time, put the time in to understand it, and done your own research, then again you're simply reciting the party line. Yeah.
Yeah, one of my other favorite things is, when people always keep throwing the absorb what is useful line at me.
Mm-hmm.
And I told them, I said, two things about it. First, it comes from Mao. It's not from Bruce. And second, do you know the line that goes before it? And they all look at me blank.
Mm-hmm.
I say, it says from your personal experience.
Right.
And they miss that. In my view, they miss the gold.
Oh, of course. It's a 4-stage understanding, which means in order for you to research your experience, you have to have experiences.
Yes.
You can't research something that you've never had, right? So you experience this, and then you research it. What is it? Again, yeah. So what does this mean for me? What does it mean for me now? What does it mean for me in the future? To absorb what's useful, again, it requires certain things.
Yes.
I use the term, which again I learned in JKD. You use the educated eye and the discerning mind, and but you have to develop the educated eye and the discerning mind, because the educated eye allows you to look at technical motions and things like that from a scientific base or from your background and analyze it and see this is biomechanically sound, this is biomechanically not sound, this is efficient, this is not efficient. And the discerning mind allows you to look at theories and concepts and understanding and recognize again that is this hold a truth? Is there any truth in it? Is there not a truth? You need both of those in order to absorb what's useful. You have to do it best. You need the educated eye and the discerning mind.
Yeah, your data set has to be rich, and you've got to have good heuristics.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah, and then like you said, there's a 4-stage, and that absorb what's useful. Yes. Well, again, what does that mean, and what does it mean to me? Reject what is useless. So many people want to jump in the JKD world, want to jump to reject what's useless right off the bat. And again, I go back to Dan being a PE teacher, and we talk about this. And he goes, so I have a 6-week block where I'm teaching basketball to my students in junior high school, right? He goes, and I don't know basketball that much. So he goes, so I show them how to run down the court and do a reverse layup, right? Yeah, boom. And so the first kid does it. He goes down, bang, completely misses it. Oh, that's stupid. That's stupid. No, the fact that you can't do it doesn't mean that it's stupid. The fact is that if you worked on it, you would be able to do it. So I'm gonna get rid of it. Well, why are you getting rid of it? You've got to know why you're getting rid of it.
Just because this is about Dan, I think my last question is, like you said, debts that can be acknowledged, never repaid. What are some of those things that have left a permanent mark on you and your development that came from Dan?
One, it's about you, nobody else. 2 is you have to do the work. You have to find it for yourself. He developed I guess maybe I already had it there. I don't know, but he nurtured my love for teaching. Like I said, because I study it. How can I be better? It's just simple things like that. But you being you, finding again what works for you, those type of things, and then sharing. My job is to I've been blessed by this art. The thing about acknowledge to Dan, that the way that I can repay Dan and Bruce, because I owe a debt of gratitude to Bruce Lee for everything that he did and where I came. The only way that I can repay that, acknowledge it, is to bring out the art and philosophy the best way that I can, and the way that I feel benefits people the most.
Mhm.
And if that's different from somebody else, and that's okay. I can't concern myself with what other people do or think, because people say, well, what do you think about this person? And I go, I don't. And they go, well, what you go, well, what do you mean? Is that so very negative? I go, no, you're asking me, what do I think about this person? I don't think about them, because doesn't mean I don't like them. Doesn't mean This means I don't spend my time thoughts thinking about them and what they're doing. I do what I do. I share what I share. There are no secrets. That's another thing, Dan. There aren't any secrets. That whole thing. You just got to know where to look and how to research. And that's one of the things was he taught me how, or he helped me develop my capacity to research for myself. So that's his teaching background. Like I said, it's his coaching background, and to be able to differentiate between coaching and teaching. So yeah.
Wonderful. Perry, do you have anything else?
No, this has been very fruitful for me. As I said, Mahipal and I have been working to more give this a broader, richer,
Mm-hmm.
contextual feel to Dan Inosanto than the original book. So
Mm-hmm.
thank you so much for your candor and
Sure.
your wealth of knowledge that you've shared.
Well, like I said, I'm very happy to do it, because I think it benefits Dan. I think it benefits everybody, but it benefits Dan for people to see him as a human being, evolved in these particular things,
Yes.
but recognize that yes, he's human like all of us. Like we said, with our frailties, with our flaws, those are what make us who we are. That's what makes Dan who he is. And I for one am so grateful that I spent the time I did with him, and I'm sure other people might feel the same at different times of the day. And but I am he was an amazing teacher to me, and I'm grateful that I spent the time with him that I did, and those are things that will be with me forever. And even doing this, what I'm happy about this is, if I can just help people see how cool he, I hate to say how cool he was, but if I can help people see just the type of person he's he was at that time. And because, like I said, it's very different. Just real quick, I know we have to go, but because I used to say, people would say, oh, and again, Ted Wong, yeah, great footwork, right? We know that. Oh, super fast moving stuff. And I go, it's true. I go, I'm not saying anything, but let me tell you something. When I met Dan, if he didn't want you to touch him, you couldn't touch him. That's why I said that's different, and that's where they've all diverged and gone on their different paths. Because Dan moved just like that. I'm not saying better. I'm not saying worse. He didn't want you to. No, you can tell his movement, his stuff, his speed, and that's what I want people to understand. Even not where he is now, but so like I said, I'm so grateful that I spent the time with him that I did.
Great.
Lovely. So please don't.
No,
Please,
I'll say.
I'm going to stop recording now.